Imagine if I revealed to you that your consciousness vibrates on a wavelength that only 1% of the world's population can truly decipher? That the reflections passing through your mind right now could constitute evidence of a psychic phenomenon that Carl Jung analyzed for entire decades. Contemporary investigations indicate that many of these exceptional consciousnesses concentrate around particular character structures, especially the INFJ and INEJ profiles that Jung himself would have identified. Stay here with me, because by the end of this content you'll understand if you possess one of the most unusual mental patterns known to mind science. And believe me, the eighth characteristic will radically transform your perception of your cognitive universe. But before continuing, like the video, share it with people who could benefit from it, and write in the comments which city you're following our YouTube channel from. Carl Jung stated, "The privilege of existence consists in becoming authentically oneself. But what happens when your true essence moves on a frequency that appears alien to everyone around you? What occurs when your consciousness processes reality through modalities that leave others bewildered, intimidated, or simply unable to follow your mental pathways?" According to Carl Jung, there exists a minuscule fraction of people whose minds operate through mechanisms radically different from the masses. These aren't simply intellectually gifted subjects. Intelligence is widespread. These are individuals whose awareness functions in dimensions that the majority of people can't even intuit, let alone decipher. But here's the fascinating aspect, and I'd like you to pay maximum attention to this point. Jung revealed that frequently these subjects don't even notice how particular their mental structure is. They spend years feeling like strangers, wondering why discussions seem superficial, why others seem unable to grasp obvious connections, why their intuitions are received with blank stares or embarrassing silences. Does this sound familiar? Keep following the content, because we're about to explore the 8 unmistakable indicators that prove your mind belongs to that elusive 1%. First indicator: you conceive patterns and connections that escape others. Carl Jung revealed that some individuals possess what he defined as inward-directed intuition, the ability to recognize patterns and connections that remain hidden from the majority of people. If you possess this type of mind, you don't just perceive isolated events or single pieces of information. You see the network that unites them all together. But it's precisely here that the situation becomes truly interesting. And this could clarify why you felt different your entire existence. When you participate in a conversation, while others focus on the words expressed, your mind simultaneously processes emotional nuances, historical context, psychic implications, and future consequences. You're not simply hearing what someone is saying. You're understanding what they mean to say, why they mean it, and what it reveals about their inner universe. According to Carl Jung, this ability derives from what he himself called the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the psyche that the majority of people never access. Those with this rare mentality can draw from this reservoir of universal patterns and archetypal wisdom without even realizing it. Here's a test. When you watch a movie or read a book, do you find yourself anticipating plot twists not based on obvious clues, but because you intuit the underlying narrative pattern? Does it often happen that you complete others' sentences, not because you're telepathic, but because you can perceive the direction their thoughts are heading? If you're nodding, you're beginning to understand why 99% of people find your mind incomprehensible. You're operating on multiple levels simultaneously, while they're concentrated on just one. But wait, there's something even deeper about this pattern recognition ability discovered by Jung that leads us directly to the second indicator. Second signal: you perceive reality through overlapping layers. Carl Jung declared, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves." But what happens when we naturally perceive these layers of meaning that Jung referred to, while others remain trapped on the surface? If you have this type of rare mind, you don't just experience events. You live the multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. When someone tells you they're fine, You don't just hear the word. You perceive the underlying emotional current, the body language that contradicts their statement, the active psychological defense mechanisms, and the deeper narrative their unconscious is trying to communicate. This is what Jung called deep psychological perception, and it's precisely why the majority of people can't understand your mind. While they process information sequentially and literally, you experience reality as a multidimensional fabric. Here's what's fundamental to understand, and this explains much of your existential experiences. When you try to share these layered insights with others, they often react with confusion or rejection. It's not because they lack intelligence. It's because they literally can't perceive the layers you're describing to them. Your insights seem to emerge from nowhere, as if you were creating non-existent connections. But Jung discovered something extraordinary in individuals with this cognitive pattern. They often become bridges between the conscious and unconscious worlds. They can translate the symbolic language of the psyche into concepts that others can begin to understand. Reflect on this. Do you naturally understand metaphors, symbols, and abstract concepts that others struggle with? Do you often communicate through stories, analogies, or examples because direct explanations don't seem to work? This brings us to an even more fascinating aspect of your unique mental architecture. Third signal, you're magnetically attracted to the dark side of human nature. According to Carl Jung, one of the most revealing indicators of a rare mind is an inexplicable fascination with what he called the shadow, the darker and hidden aspects of human nature that the majority of people desperately try to ignore or deny. If you possess this type of consciousness, you don't just recognize that everyone has a dark side. You're genuinely curious about it. You want to understand why people commit terrible actions, what drives destructive behaviors, and how the human psyche can contain such contradictions. But here's what makes all this truly extraordinary and why it disturbs so many people. While others are content to label certain behaviors as simply evil or wrong, your mind seeks to understand the underlying psychological mechanisms. You're not justifying harmful actions. You're trying to understand the human condition in its totality. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining luminous figures, but by making the darkness conscious." Your mind is naturally drawn to this process of making the unconscious conscious, of exploring the forbidden territories of the psyche. This is why you might feel attracted to complex and morally ambiguous characters in literature and cinema, drawn to crime stories not for their shocking value, but for psychological insights, fascinated by philosophy, psychology, and fields that explore the depths of human experience, and engaged by conversations on topics that others find uncomfortable or taboo. But here's the key insight Jung discovered. This fascination with the shadow isn't morbid curiosity. It's a sign of psychological maturity and integration. You understand that to truly know yourself and others, you must recognize the entire spectrum of human potential. The majority of people find this situation disturbing because they're still in a state of psychological splitting. Good versus evil, right versus wrong, light versus darkness. Your mind has moved beyond these simplistic categories, reaching a more nuanced understanding of human nature. And this brings us to perhaps the most isolating aspect of having this type of rare consciousness. Fourth signal, you feel like you're speaking a different language. Carl Jung discovered that individuals with this rare cognitive pattern often experience what he called psychological loneliness, the feeling that no one truly understands the language of their inner world. If you have this type of mentality, you've probably lived through countless conversations where you felt like you were speaking in code. You share what seems like a simple observation only to receive blank stares or responses that didn't grasp the point at all. Here's what's happening at a deeper level, and this will explain much of your social experiences. Your mind naturally communicates through symbols, metaphors, and multi-layered meanings. When you speak, you're not just transmitting information. You're transmitting entire conceptual frameworks, emotional plots, and insights. But the majority of people can only receive superficial and literal communications. According to Carl Jung, this communication gap isn't a flaw in your way of thinking. It's proof that your consciousness operates at a frequency that transcends ordinary awareness. You're like a radio station transmitting in HD, while most people only have AM receivers. Think about it. How many times have you simplified your thoughts just to be understood? How often do you find yourself saying, "never mind," because explaining your actual viewpoint would require too much context? This is why you might gravitate toward written communication, where you can elaborate your thoughts more carefully, prefer one-on-one conversations rather than group discussions, and find creative expression as a means to express what words can't capture, because sometimes it seems easier than trying to translate your inner world. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. This communication challenge isn't an obstacle to overcome. It's a door to deeper understanding. Your unique language is an invitation for others to expand their consciousness. And this brings us to a sign that might surprise you. Fifth sign, you're not comfortable with pure logic. It might seem counterintuitive, but Carl Jung discovered that individuals with rare minds often feel limited by purely logical thinking. If you have this cognitive pattern, you don't reject logic. You recognize its limitations. While others rely on linear reasoning and cause and effect thinking, your mind operates through what Jung called intuitive logic, a form of understanding that incorporates emotions, symbolism, paradoxes, and nonlinear connections. Here's why this makes it so difficult for others to understand you. When faced with a problem, while others create logical sequences step by step, your mind processes multiple variables simultaneously. You're not just considering what makes logical sense, but also what feels right, what aligns with deeper patterns, and what respects the complexity of the situation. According to Carl Jung, this isn't an inferior way of thinking. It's a superior integration. You're not abandoning logic. You're placing it within a more complete framework that includes intuition, emotion, and unconscious wisdom. This is why you should trust your instinct even when you can't explain it logically. Learn to identify flaws in technically valid arguments that somehow miss the point. Prefer creative problem solving to mechanical rule application, and feel frustrated by people who ignore everything that can't be measured or quantified. But here's Jung's profound insight. This discomfort with pure logic isn't a weakness. It's a sign that your mind has integrated multiple ways of knowing to achieve a more complete understanding of reality. Most people operate based on logic or emotions, thinking or feelings, rationality or intuition. Your rare mind has learned to dance between these modalities, creating a symphony of understanding that sounds like chaos to those who can only hear one instrument at a time. And this integration leads us to one of the most powerful signs of this rare consciousness. Sixth signal, you see through social masks effortlessly. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves." But what happens when we naturally perceive the masks people wear, the personalities they present to the world, and the authentic self hiding underneath? If you have this type of rare mind, you don't just notice when someone isn't being authentic. You can see the specific ways they're protecting themselves, the fears driving their behavior, and the genuine person struggling to emerge behind their social costume. This ability is both a gift and a burden. And here's why it makes you so incomprehensible to others. While most people accept social interactions for what they are, your mind constantly processes the subtext. You're reading micro-expressions, noticing congruence between words and body language, perceiving emotional undercurrents that completely escape others. According to Carl Jung, this perception derives from your natural access to what he called active imagination, the ability to see beyond the literal surface of things into their deeper psychological reality. But here's what's truly extraordinary. You don't just see through masks. You understand why people wear them. You recognize the protective function of personas, the vulnerability hiding behind defensive behaviors, and the universal human need to feel safe and accepted. This is why you might find yourself naturally becoming a confidant for others even when you don't intend to. You might feel exhausted by social situations where everyone is performing, prefer authentic, vulnerable conversations to small talk, and sometimes know more about someone's inner state than they know about themselves. But here's the challenge Jung identified. This ability to see through social masks can create a profound sense of isolation. You're surrounded by people wearing costumes, speaking in code, and pretending to be someone they're not, and you're one of the few who can see the performance. This brings us to a sign that might explain some of your deepest struggles: existential loneliness. Carl Jung discovered that individuals with this rare cognitive pattern often experience what he called existential loneliness, a profound sense of aloneness in the universe, not because they lack social connections, but because they perceive reality in ways that seem impossible to share. If you have this type of mind, you've probably felt this deep and painful isolation that has nothing to do with how many people surround you. You can be in a crowded room and still feel like the only person of your species on the planet. Here's what's happening at a psychological level, and this explains much of your inner experience. Your consciousness naturally gravitates toward the big questions. Why are we here? What is the meaning of existence? How do we reconcile the beauty and suffering of life? While others are content with surface-level living, your mind constantly grapples with the fundamental mysteries of existence. According to Carl Jung, this existential orientation isn't depression or morbidity. It's a sign of psychological depth and spiritual maturity. You don't settle for superficial answers because your mind demands authentic understanding. But here's the profound challenge. When you try to share these existential insights and questions with others, they often respond with discomfort, rejection, or attempts to redirect the conversation to more practical matters. This is why you might find yourself feeling more understood by books, art, or music than by people. You might find yourself seeking meaning in experiences others take for granted, questioning social assumptions everyone else accepts without thinking, and feeling like you're from another planet when others seem satisfied with superficial explanations. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you really are." But what happens when who you really are seems to exist in a dimension others can't perceive? This existential loneliness isn't a flaw in your psychology. It's proof that your consciousness has expanded beyond conventional boundaries of awareness. You're experiencing the vastness of existence, while others remain focused on the narrow circle of daily concerns. And this brings us to the final and deepest sign of this rare consciousness. Eighth signal: you're naturally drawn to transformation. Carl Jung discovered that the rarest minds are magnetically attracted to transformation, not just personal growth, but the alchemical process of fundamental change he called individuation. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, you might be one of those rare individuals who embody what Jung called the introverted intuitive, someone naturally drawn to the depths of personal transformation. If you have this type of awareness, you don't just want to improve yourself. You feel called to completely transform who you are. You're attracted to experiences that destroy and rebuild you, challenge your fundamental assumptions about reality, and force you to confront the deepest aspects of your psyche. Here's what makes all this so extraordinary and why it terrifies most people. While others seek stability, predictability, and comfort, your mind craves the chaos of transformation. You're not afraid of psychological death and rebirth because you understand that's how authentic growth happens. According to Carl Jung, this attraction to transformation is the hallmark of what he called the individuated person, someone who has integrated their conscious and unconscious mind, embraced their shadow and light, and become a complete human being. But here's the profound insight Jung discovered. This process of transformation isn't optional for minds like yours. You're not choosing to go through intense periods of change. You're called by something deeper than your conscious will. This is why you might find yourself repeatedly drawn to experiences others would avoid, naturally seeking challenges that force you to grow, feeling restless when life becomes too comfortable or predictable, and understanding that crisis often precedes breakthrough. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Your rare mind doesn't just accept this challenge. It embraces it as the fundamental purpose of existence. Most people spend their lives avoiding transformation, clinging to familiar patterns and resisting the call to become who they truly are. Your consciousness operates from the awareness that transformation isn't something that happens to you. It's something you actively participate in as a co-creator of your becoming. So there you have it. The 8 unmistakable signs that you possess a mind that 99% of people simply cannot understand. If you've recognized yourself in these patterns, you're not alone in your uniqueness. You're part of a rare community of consciousness that Carl Jung spent his life studying and celebrating. But here's what I want you to understand in conclusion. Your different mind isn't a burden to bear. It's a gift to the world. Carl Jung discovered that individuals with this rare cognitive pattern often become bridges between the conscious and unconscious worlds, translators of the symbolic language of the psyche, and catalysts for transformation in others. Your ability to see patterns that others don't grasp, to perceive reality in layers, to understand the dark aspects of human nature, to speak the language of symbols and metaphors, to integrate multiple ways of knowing, to see through social masks, to confront existential questions, and to embrace transformation. These are not signs of brokenness or negative difference. They are signs that your consciousness has expanded beyond the normal boundaries of awareness.